Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's return guest is Amy Gibb, or as I call her, Money Amy. Amy is a certified financial planner. She advises individuals and businesses and was a guest on episode number 7, way back when, Financial Freedom with Money Amy. Welcome back, Amy.
Hi, good to see you.
It is good to see you. We're doing video, but you folks will only hear the audio. And I was prompted by a listener question to talk a little bit about the financial distress that COVID-19 is causing some people, not all. It's an interesting situation where some people are not affected and some people are tremendously. Like 20% unemployment rate. Last I checked, it could be higher now.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a different tone with today's episode. The previous episode was uplifting and positive. How do we change our behavior to be able to be financially free? And now this is about how do we change our behavior to financially survive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some urgent kind of financial issues. We'll talk, I think, kind of some near-term planning, some long-term planning, but I called you, Amy, as I always do when I have financial questions. Let's talk first to the solo listener who may have lost their job, may be concerned they're losing their job, has a lot of uncertainty about their career path. You know what I mean? Like, what are some of the kinds of things that you're seeing with your practice that come to mind that will be helpful?
Yeah, first thing is, and I think it's pretty obvious, you're not in this alone. People are experiencing all different effects from COVID. I think the common experience is anxiety, uncertainty. You don't know what's going to happen. You feel vulnerable. So just know you have a lot of company, and sometimes it's good to talk to other people about your concerns. Americans generally don't talk about money. They'll talk about sex, drugs, everything else. They won't talk about money. So, find safe people that you trust that you can talk to, even if it's just to vent and share your concerns. So sometimes just getting it out and talking about it, whether it's to a friend on the phone or in a distance walk down the street with a friend. So talk about it because you have a lot of company.
Can I interrupt there for a second? I think that's a great starting point. I think that a lot of people, they don't want to talk about these things in part because, I think you're right. Like, it just seems like a taboo topic. And I found myself like sort of forcing myself to talk to the people who are close to me about my financial situation, especially if you're going to lean on those people for some advice. It helps for them to have a real clear picture of how you're doing. And so I know that's hard to do. You should do it. Obviously, you should do it with people that you trust. The same people you might talk about your sex, drugs, and rock and roll with, which should be the same kinds of people that you can talk about your financial situation.
Yeah. And just as when you get that kind of advice too, take everything with a grain of salt. Some people will tell you, oh, stop worrying. There's no problem. Stop feeling that way. And some people will say, oh my God, it's the end of the world. You should have behaved better in the past. So anybody's advice that is not useful for you, leave it.
Yeah,
it is not helpful to internalize any negativity and any self-blaming. Oh, I should have. I have a list of about 20 things I should have done before COVID that if I'd known COVID was coming and I didn't do them. And there's a little bit of that self-whipping process. Just leave that because that's in the past. And now we're here. And all that matters really is, decisions you make for yourself moving forward in a way to support yourself.
Again, I think that's great advice. The past is the past. The costs are sunk. The decisions are made.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the other mistake would be to not make changes.
Yeah. Yeah. That ignoring thing, where you pretend it's not a problem. You open a new credit card, you buy a new wardrobe, maybe isn't a healthy way to go forward either. It's, it's fine to cheat on your diet periodically, but not every day for a month. So yeah, you need to have some self-knowledge and some self-control and some information as you go forward.
Yes. Okay. So, lean on the people that are good to lean on. Obviously, the ideal person is to talk to your financial planner. As I said in the previous episode, find someone like Money Amy, a fee-based financial planner, someone who is being paid for their time and not for what you do with your wealth, because that creates some perverse incentives for that person.
Yes.
And so let's talk, in the moment, right? Like, so I'm going to get this out rather quickly. This is, we're working, Amy. It's Memorial Day weekend. We are working. Yeah. And so I'm going to try to get this out as soon as I can. But like, the person listens to this podcast today, they're in financial distress. They're facing financial distress. What's right out of the gate? What should they be thinking about? You're great about making to-do lists. What starts to go on their to-do list?
The first thing is take an inventory. It's easy to freak out about the unknown. And, maybe after you take your inventory, you'll freak out again, but at least do an inventory. I was watching the movie The Martian, and the first thing he did when he kind of got his crap together and sewed up his injuries was he did an inventory of the food he had. And he marked all the packages and how much he was allowed to eat every day. And he knew kind of how many days he had left. So in a sense like that, do an inventory. Take an inventory of everything you own and have, which includes savings, checking, investments, retirement accounts. If you have a loan on your car, include your car, cash under the mattress, people that owe you money, a list of everything you own and a list of everything you owe. Credit cards, mortgages, 401k loans, student loans, how much you owe, the interest rate, and the minimum monthly payment. So do an inventory, and then and that's what we would call a balance sheet. What you owe or what you own, what you owe, and that is your personal balance sheet. What you own is called an asset. What you owe is called a liability. So you just want to know what the landscape looks like. And then you want to do, what we call in business a profit loss. You need to see what kind of money you having coming in, if any. Are you getting a partial paycheck? Are you getting unemployment? Whatever. And a budget where all your money goes. And what you might do is take a snapshot of February. February's assets, liabilities, expenses. So you know where your money's going. So an inventory.
I see. Yeah. And so, right. So a car is a liability if you owe money on it, and it's an asset if it...
Well, you add it to the asset list. I have a car. It's 4 years old. It's worth $20,000 today. And I have a car loan for $15,000 at the credit union at 5% interest at $300 a month. That's what that would look like. I
see. And, this, for solos, they have the benefit of sometimes a simpler financial situation.
Yep. And you don't have to negotiate.
That's right. It's unilateral decision making.
Yeah, it's a dictatorship.
And then, I think the thing is, you have to go deep, right? Like there are things like your insurance payment, which might happen once a year.
Correct.
And so on. And I think, if I may try to guess why, one of the reasons why you're suggesting this is because you have to figure out what you might be able to trim from those liabilities.
Yeah. So I think when we do financial planning, this is one of the first things we do anyway. We do an inventory. So the process you're going to go through on this kind of fire drill, emergency concern during COVID is the process you might have done before COVID or maybe never have done, but it's useful regardless. So what you want to see is what the landscape looks like. So what you own, what you owe every month, what your budget looks like, then you kind of have some information with which then to take the next step.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to admit this to my listeners. So Amy does this whenever I have like a big decision to make Amy always asks me, all right, how much are you spending every month? And all this kind of stuff. And I tell her, I don't know, and I'm not going to do it. And and the reason for that is that I spent the first, well, let's say, 40 years of my life, at least, the years in which I was, from 14 to 40, basically having to figure out every single penny that I had and where it was going and what I was spending it on. And, I had to be so tuned into my finances that I knew all that stuff. And I did all the things that we were sort of talking about. And then at some point I got financially free enough that I never wanted to go back to that, because it is unpleasant.
No, it isn't. And I would say, I'm kind of at that stage too, to a point, but I have a kid in college still. But if your natural tendencies, like Peter's are, is you're pretty frugal and you generally underspend what you make, that is his given, even though he's spending more now maybe than when he was 14. That's his natural tendency. I will say that at some level he does check in with himself, even if he says he doesn't, on how he spends money.
That's so
fair. In this situation, if Pete came to me and said, I have no income, I have all these expenses, I'm freaking out, it's COVID, I would push to have him do that so we have some self-knowledge. So then going forward, we know what he could trim, what things he needs to do. So the goal is that they don't knock on your door in 30 days and say, you're out of here. You didn't pay your rent, you didn't pay your mortgage, and leaves you with no choices. The goal is that you have more control.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting anybody do what I'm doing now. I'm saying you can get to where I am now if you, if you spend years and years and years being, financially disciplined.
Yes.
Which is either in your nature or out of necessity. It happened to be both for me. Okay. So you create your balance sheet. And that may be painful, and you should set aside an afternoon, right? This is not something you do in an hour. This is going to take some time.
Well, you get online and you look at your balance on April 30th. I recommend everyone, for their balance sheet goes to April 30th. What's in your checking account? What's in your savings account? If you have a retirement account, what's in your retirement account? How much do you have buried in the backyard? What do you think your car is worth? If you have a house, what's your house worth? All those things. And same on the debt side. What was your credit card balance on April 30th? What's your mortgage balance? What's your student loan balance? And then you'll start to see the picture.
Okay. All right. So you start to get this picture, you're putting this on a piece of paper or probably better on an Excel spreadsheet. Then what?
And then it's the spending, and, I would say go back to the month of February, credit card, checking account, and look at where every place your money goes. And I would create 4 to 10 categories. It's living, rent, mortgage, whatever that is for your housing, food, housing, utilities, food, insurance, car, all the basics, and then the extras, which might be eating out, entertainment, gifts, travel, and consider those sort of extra. And then also think, as Pete had said, sometimes we pay insurance once a year. Sometimes, things happen twice a year. Think about things that happen periodically so they don't surprise you. If you own a house and if you don't escrow on your mortgage and you pay your own property taxes, that's a big one, and you got to see that one coming. Although I find that a lot of people that tend to be tighter on finances pay their insurance every month in monthly payments.
Yes,
anyway, so get a picture. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you should have a picture of the landscape on where your money's going. And don't make judgment, because we just need information. I spend $500 a month eating out. I spend, I go on 4 trips a year and spend $5,000 each trip. So make sure you pick up those periodic things that are happening too. Doesn't mean we're going to say budget for those in the next 90 days, but at least you know what your habitual behaviors are.
Yeah. And I think this is obviously good advice, COVID or not. I think for me, one of the things that the world has gotten in some ways a little too easy. So I think this might have come up in our previous episode was, there was a time where you had to pay everything with cash and check. And so it was very clear how you were spending your money because you could, like you felt the pain of paying it. You were putting it in a ledger. Now what happens is, I pay utilities and things with credit cards. Mm-hmm. And so then I get one bill or two bills at the end of the month. And occasionally the bill is huge. Yeah. And I go, what the hell? There has to be a mistake here. Yeah. And then I go looking through the individual charges and there are no mistakes. This is, and then I know some credit cards will do this, will give you the breakdown of where you're spending your money and what the amounts are. Yeah. And that can be, especially when it comes to things like eating out or ordering food nowadays.
Or subscriptions.
And things. And
memberships.
You go, oh my goodness, I can't believe how much money I'm spending in restaurants and bars and so on. So this is useful in terms of just giving you clarity in terms of where do your dollars go and do they match up with where your intuitions about where you spend your money?
Well, and then your income, your current income, your future income, and what you can afford.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay. All right. So I think we've hammered this. If someone is not willing to do that, they're at a disadvantage, yes?
Yeah, they're going to be making decisions, right? So you're freaking out because you don't have as much money and it's COVID and you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to turn off the heat in the air conditioner and not buy groceries or, you're going to make this. And I would say half your decisions are going to probably be okay. I think people have more instinct around what they should be doing. Somehow their grandparents and parents got into their heads. But then you're going to make half your decisions that aren't to your best advantage. Why not make the math work for you?
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And it's simple algebra. This is, Excel and a calculator can be used for this.
However, people's behaviors are 90% emotion, 10% math. So it's good to know, you're still going to have your emotional behaviors, but it's you can make better decisions with some information and to more benefit. You now can't afford to do takeout once a week or something. And you'll be more comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Okay. So where are some of the places? So what is the next step? So let's suppose you're, what is it? In the black, in the red? You're in the red?
You're in
red
the red.
Bad?
Yeah. So, I'm going to slide a couple other things in here. Sure. Whatever you feel about politics or what they're doing in Washington, whatever, there are a lot of programs, including unemployment, the PPP loan, lots of programs from the government to fill some of the gaps we're all experiencing. If you're self-employed, you can still do the PPP loan or the unemployment now, where you used to not be able to. If you were W-2, you can sign up for unemployment. So, and I have walked 20 clients through these various processes. And it is interesting, as much as people give Americans a hard time about, credit card spending, lazy, don't work hard, people are very reluctant to sign up for unemployment, even though they qualify. They are reluctant to sign up for the PPP loan, even though they qualify. It's sort of this American, I'll be more frugal, I'll be more careful, I'll start working harder. And I applaud people for that. But at some level, there's nothing wrong with filling the gap with the current programs, because we're all going to pay for it anyway, So I would say on the income side, people that are having income problems because they're laid off, they lost their job, they're self-employed, they have no customers, really take some time to delve into these programs, get your friends to help you, get people to help you. It's a pain in the butt, but it's a piece of the puzzle. So make sure you look at those things.
Yeah. I mean, they are there to help you. They're not always there to make it easy.
No,
but
it's a piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So, make sure that you're spending time. You're going to spend Labor Day filling out an unemployment form, but you're going to do it anyway. Yeah. So you've looked at the world, you've seen your assets, you've seen your liabilities, you've seen your income. All of a sudden you see you're in the red. So the reality is certainly you could go on living your life like you are probably for another 30 to 90 days before they come knock on your door and you're really in a lot of trouble. But, make changes now. Actually, now and in 60 days, 90 days, in a year, your life will be better and easier if you make changes now. Mm-hmm. So that's the big deal.
Okay. And so, and let's be honest, even if you're not in the red, there's enough uncertainty
Yep.
about the future that it's probably a good idea to pull back unless you are 100% certain you'll be unaffected.
Yeah, if you're one of those people that has 6 to 12 months of living expenses, you have access to additional liquidity beyond that if you need to, you're making as much money as you did in the past, you feel really confident, be self-aware. Be self-aware. In the past we'd say, oh, you need a month or two of emergency money. Guess what? We need 6 to 12 months of emergency money, and most people don't have that.
Yes.
So, even if you're in a really good position, you need to take an inventory, and if not, make changes today. Be ready to start making changes, 6 months before you think, you're going to have some financial challenges.
Yeah. I mean, the great irony in this is that essentially COVID is either like this gentle reminder that you need to get your financial house in order, or it's an urgent call.
Yeah. A fire drill. It's time.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, the first thing you want to do is look at essential things that you need to pay on time every month. The biggest things that hit your credit report for paying on time every month is if you have a house, it's your mortgage.
Okay.
So at some level, if you still have money to pay your mortgage, you pay that on time every month. And I even tell people pay it 5 days early, 10 days early, because then if you get into a pinch, you can now pay up to 10 days after the first of the month, still be on time, and all of a sudden you've bought yourself 20 days.
Got it.
And then secondarily, your car payment. For whatever reason, your car payment, your mortgage payment are the big hits on your credit bureau. Things that don't show up on your credit bureau generally are your water bill, your electric bill. Eventually your cell phone will show up on your credit, but for a while. So if you have to lag on anything, lag not on your mortgage and your car. Always car payment, mortgage. Everything else you can lag a little bit on.
Okay.
Now, before you get to the point that you're lagging on your credit card, your electric bill, you're in such trauma that you are now starting to have to pay late on your bills, make a phone call. So it's so much better to get ahead of it and make a phone call, even if it's your mortgage or a car payment. There's a ton of programs out there now with mortgage lenders and everybody that's lending money, credit cards, everyone's on board with this, where you can renegotiate your monthly payment. Now, be clear. When you have that conversation, number one, you want to say, will this affect my credit? And generally they're going to say, no, it doesn't, because during COVID, they would, get a lot of bad reputation if they dinged you after they negotiated a deal with you, if they dinged your credit. But ask that question. Will this affect my credit? The second thing you ask is this a deferral, or I don't have to make a payment? Because what we're seeing, what we're all worried about is we get through this, we're 9 months from now. Oh, great. I've had my car payment on deferral for 9 months. And then they send me a due bill for $4,000 on December 1st for the last 9 months of payments.
Yes.
So you need to understand if it's a deferral or a grant, a gift. I will tell you 99% of them aren't going to be a grant or a gift. It's going to be a deferral. So understand that. The big thing we're concerned about is the second hit. It's second hit of COVID, but the second hit on the economy where everybody got so far behind that now all of a sudden we owe all this money and we can't make it either. So understand if it's a deferral, understand what happens. You're going to still accrue interest probably. And then after the fact, ask them if they're going to restructure your payment so you can afford it.
I see.
But make those phone calls before you ever pay late. You do not want to start making those phone calls after you're 1 or 2 or 3 months late. Certainly they'll negotiate with you at that time, but I think you have less power in that situation.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. Actually, this might be a good time for a listener question then that's related to this idea. This is from Kim. She says that she's seeing lots of 0% interest opportunities for things like school loans and credit cards and so on. And her question was, should I take advantage of those things? Even though I currently have the money, I can still pay for things now, but I'm uncertain about my ability to pay later.
Yeah. So just once again, you're going to still owe the money in the future. And a lot of these 0% loans then in the past have then in 12 months, they go up to 18% or something. So you're still going to owe the money in the future. So don't be foolish about borrowing money today to stop from having to make hard decisions about what not to buy. And, I still want to buy things and go out to eat. And so I'm going to borrow this money to support my budget. But I would say, be aware of what's available, line up the terms and conditions of those options. And, maybe you do take advantage of refinance of your student loans at 0%, but depends on what the interest rate's in the future.
Yeah,
and then just do quick math about the difference. My student loan's 5% now. They'll do 0% for 6 months, and it goes up to 10%.
Not a good idea.
Do the calculation and the difference. A lot of times the interest is not necessarily that large of a number.
Yes. Yeah. So read the fine print. And frankly, this is just not a way to work around having to cut costs.
Yeah. Make hard decisions anyway.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of those hard decisions what do they need to be? Not the worst case, but in a very difficult situation, one of your biggest expenses is your housing. So whether it's a house you own or a house you rent or an apartment you rent or where you live, take a hard look at where you live and what it costs you. Ironically, housing sales and purchases are still rolling because the interest is so low. So if you look at a house that you stretched to get into and you could barely make your mortgage payment, and now of a couple, or this is for solo people, okay, now you're making 60% of what you were making and you can't make the mortgage. And certainly you could probably make it for another 3 or 4 months, but if this goes on for 18 months, it's never going to work. So you might take a look at changing your housing situation, to sell your house, to move into a smaller apartment, to get roommates, any of those situations, because that's your largest expense. Also has a strong effect on your credit if you default. So, sometimes it's actually a good time to make a housing decision. Even though you don't want to go look at stuff or have people in your house looking, there's still a market there. So that's, I think, the bigged one. Yeah, I have had various times in my life. I as a solo, I like living alone. I enjoy it a lot, and I've had a great benefit as a young man having jobs that gave me housing, which was nice. And then, but when I was a graduate student, I remember my first year living alone. I mean, this is in the late 90s, and I was making like $14K a year in the Midwest. And I just did the math on it, and I was like, I can cut my monthly expenditure on housing in half if I get 2 roommates in this duplex. And I remember, having really mixed emotions about that. Like on one hand, it was super fun to have roommates. We threw great parties and you have company. And on the other hand, it was a drag when my girlfriend wanted to come over, and, one of my roommates was like in the kitchen, while we're trying to make dinner.
Yeah.
And so, but I made that sort of, that half painful decision for that reason. When I just looked at what my expenditure was, that was, I don't know, maybe, at least a third, maybe, 40% of my expenditure.
Yeah.
A month.
Housing. And no, it's not forever. It's not going to be forever. And then, and you get to decide, set up in priority the, top 5 to 10 things on where your money goes that you would give up other things for. Like, I do not want to have roommates. I know I could make $500 a month if I had roommates. I would rather not eat out, not have air conditioning, not buy clothes for the next year if I don't have to have a roommate. That is fine. But you can't have everything on your list. So if you have a list of 50 things that you like, choose the top 10, go for the top 10, cut off the other ones.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing is that people often forget how adaptable they are.
Yep.
And so the transition is painful, but once you get settled in, it can often be quite, can become quite comfortable, assuming you make a good choice in terms of the transition, assuming you make a good choice in terms of your roommate, or if let's say you downsize your place, or you go to a different neighborhood or whatever it might be, that you make sure that like the essential things that you need to be comfortable and happy are there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I often think that like space is a little bit overrated.
Yep. It's just because we have too much stuff. If you get rid of your stuff, you can live in a pretty small space.
Yes. And I think that I want to return to that idea about stuff because actually, let's just talk about it now for a moment, because I was jotting down a few ideas, and this may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but so your advice about doing the balance sheet, I think, is number one. But I think that often what happens is with our financial situation, we just feel like we're like we've lost control.
Yeah.
You know, there's things that are outside of our control. And I'm a big believer in how can you find a way to take more control over your life? Mm-hmm. And so you're not going to be surprised to hear this, Amy, because you know me well. But when I have those moments, I like to tidy up. And so I like the tidying up process. And I would actually say that if on Saturday you do your P&L, on Sunday it's worth tidying up. Mm-hmm. And the idea being is it's going to be a way to sort of catalog what you have.
Yeah.
You know, and so going through your wardrobe and making your piles. This I definitely want to keep. This I want to definitely donate. This I'm embarrassed to donate. I'm turning it into rags or whatever it is, you know, and just go through and like, you'd be surprised how much stuff you have that you don't really need, and how nice it feels to make that pile, to donate, to give to people who need it more than you.
Yeah. So it's whatever your motivator is. Is it to help other people? Is it to make more room in your closet? Is to give you a sense of control? To have a cleaner house? Now we're spending so much time at home these days, to have a nicer place to live. So I agree. Any of those things that you can do to kind of get a feeling for what you own and what is not important anymore. Also, I think motivates you to make those decisions around where you spend your money. What's really not important, we just pay it because they send us the bill every month.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, like, for example, going through and organizing your kitchen is a useful task, in part because you probably should be cooking more, you know? And so, and so, you know, the world's made it so easy to order food.
Yeah.
That you just order food, right? So, you know, yes, it's a time savings, but you pay for that. You know what I mean? When you look at, like, when you order that $12 entree, it quickly through Grubhub or Postmates or Uber Eats is really $18 between the tax, the tip, and the delivery fee.
Yep.
You know, and so and you got to wait for it anyways. And so sitting down and actually learning to make some simple, low-cost, healthy meals.
And not just by buying one of those services like Blue Apron or something.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's not terrible, but it does add costs. So yeah, cooking, you know, certainly you can order out, you can still order out, you can still do pickup, just reduce. You know, when it comes to changing spending behaviors and lifestyle behaviors, you don't have to go all in. It doesn't have to be 100%. Anything you can do to move the needle, to, you know, spending less money, being more frugal, being smarter with your stuff helps. You know, 10%, 20% makes a difference.
Yes. And then you can, I mean, again, it helps to know how much you're spending on food to begin with, because
it can be very sobering.
It can be, I mean, I've been there.
I'm like, I've just been running around with my credit card. You know, I certainly didn't eat out and spend $500 this month. Well, actually you did.
Yes.
So it is really good to be aware.
And let's just talk about eating for a moment, because that's another big expenditure. It's also something you can't not do, right? You've got to eat, right? In the same way you need some sort of shelter, you need to eat. And so, you know, I remember, you know, I would do all the right things, you know, so I'd buy healthy-ish, at least back then, food in bulk, you know, so I was buying, you know, you buy things like eggs and peanut butter and cheese and, you know what I mean? Nowadays you can get these, you know, a big container of spinach, you know what I mean? Or mixed greens, for $5, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Which is a great base that's going to fill you up in a meal,
Mm-hmm.
and then, learning the sort of basics of how do you cook in order to be able to look forward to eating, because that's part of the problem, right? Why is it that we order food? It's not just the convenience, but it's like you want to enjoy your meal.
And interesting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, then the beautiful thing about the world now is we've got YouTube videos, we have a lot
how to cook.
right. We have a lot of opportunities to learn just like the little basics with COVID, I have been existing basically on salads and tacos, like things that are pretty healthy, pretty easy to make, and tasty. You know what I mean? At least salads are tasty as you get used to eating salads.
Yeah.
And you're not drowning them in salad dressing in order to keep them on the healthy side of things. And as a result, it's, I think for a lot of people, their expenses are way down as a result of that. But that's something you want to carry forward.
Yeah. I'm not buying gas.
Yes. So let's talk about the car, because that's also another major expense. I also think the thing about cars is, they're such a part of the American fabric. We have a tendency to think that they are essential, and they also tend to be major cost. So for example, and they also have kind of like, they feel, the costs feel a little bit hidden, So for example, people have garages in their homes, which they pay a mortgage on in order to store this thing, And so if you're willing to either forgo your car and then now walk, bike, take the bus, take Uber, you can often cut your expenses quite a lot. Or if you're willing to downsize your car, to get something that's much more economical. One of the beautiful things about cars these days are even the economical cars are incredibly reliable, and they're pretty good cars these days.
Yes. And
so, as you once told me, know whether something is a necessity or a luxury purchase. And a basic car can be a necessity, but your fancy car is a luxury.
It is a luxury always. And if you can afford it and that's where you choose to spend your money, that's absolutely fine. In fact, our economy appreciates you spending money on a luxury car. But if you have a car and a loan on that and you're looking at that and you say, if things stay the same for the next 6 months, I'm going to have trouble making that car payment, trade down now. Trade down, see if you can get, for the equity you have in your car, see if you can get a reliable used car with no payment. I highly recommend that. Really, in general, between depreciation, your garage, your insurance, your gas, your maintenance, it's about $1,000 a month for a car. Give or take.
That's amazing.
It's a lot. So, downsize your car, get rid of the extra car. If you're concerned, do it now. And the good news is, when our economy recovers, in 8 to 24 months, there's going to be cars out there. They're going to have 0% financing. You're going to be able to buy a car with no problem. I'm telling you. But if you're having trouble affording your car, downsize now. Do it now.
Yeah. I had read this is early on when Uber was starting to really take off, but a economist had done an analysis. It may be out of date now, but if you just took Ubers instead of having a car, I think like the break even, again, this depends on where you live. Like if you're in an urban center. Yeah. But, and how much you drive typically, especially now though people are not commuting, so if you're going to work at home and so on, that suddenly the financial side of Uber or Lyft, the car sharing can work for you. That is that you can actually save money by taking car sharing services rather than owning the car. The problem is that it seems sort of painful to pay each time you get into a car, but owning a car doesn't have that same.
Well, it's because we don't internalize the depreciation on the car. So your depreciation on the car is anywhere from $100 to $400 a month. every month that you own the car, and we don't experience that. If we have a car loan, we kind of are experiencing it with our car payment. But in general, we're not thinking about what a car really costs. So yeah, and on the flip side, I have had a couple clients and a couple friends have done Uber. It basically is just using up your car faster. So if you really do the math as being an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, all you're doing is eating up your car and depreciating your car. It's not a very profitable endeavor. Mm-hmm. So then it would be logical on the flip side is taking an Uber or a Lyft vehicle is more economical than owning.
I see. Yeah. And I mean, of course, I'm not saying that you should get rid of your car and use Uber all the time. I'm saying is that if you don't drive that much, right, you don't have a long commute, you have an expensive car, it can really be a place to shave dollars off your monthly expense.
And it, once again, doesn't have to be forever. So if you say, I've got a really nice BMW, but my car payment's $800 a month and my insurance is $400 a month. And, I'm really worried I'm not going to make it in 3 to 6 months. Trade it in, get rid of it. And then in a year or two, if you're doing really well and you can afford it, go buy your BMW again.
And you have your 6-month emergency fund that will get you through it.
So just know it's not forever. And it's actually an interesting experiment. Think of it as you have a great opportunity during COVID to do some financial experiments. Yes. Things that you were not motivated to do before that you're now motivated to do.
Yeah. And I'm going to make one last case for switching over. I'm in Los Angeles these days, and I actually, even though I own a car, I sometimes take Uber. Mm-hmm. And I do that in part because it's less stressful, and I don't have to find parking. I don't have to pay for parking, and so there's a convenience factor that is also built into that. Again, depending on where you live.
Yeah. My son has a 30-year-old Jeep car that we always worry that's not going to make it another day. And so, he drives it around. I always say, don't drive farther than you can walk home, in 3 hours. But, if he's going someplace where you have to park or whatever, they take Ubers, and then he doesn't have to worry about the drinking thing. And I think it economically works.
Yes, it can work. Okay. So, all right. So, we have, and one thing that I like about some of this advice is that it actually is designed to improve your health also, right?
Eating from home.
Eating at home. If you are more likely to walk or bike because you're trying to limit the use of your car.
Yep.
That's there. Now, some of these are, have, I think, zero effect. I mean, another one is subscriptions, right?
Yep.
So what is it you're paying for every month?
For all the subscriptions.
Whether you use it or not.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah. And I actually am not a big subscriber, but I see that my kids are occasionally, and they're doing Netflix and whatever the music ones are. And some, there's a lot of subscriptions you can do monthly.
Including a gym.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So here's the thing, I think, with COVID, you cancel now. They're going to take you back if you want to go back. It's not like, once again, it's not forever. If you went through and canceled every single subscription that you had, every single one, you would be surprised the deals you're going to get if you ever want to go back. Mm-hmm. And they add up. Your gym at, $39.99, your, Netflix, your music ones, your credit checking ones, all that is probably a couple $100 a month. And so, there's nothing wrong with canceling everything and then adding back if there were some things that meant a lot to you.
Yes. Okay. So, I think some of these things depend a little bit on this kind of cost benefit. As you were saying, what are the things that are essential to being happy? You know what I mean? In this way, I can imagine someone hearing Netflix and go, "Oh, I just couldn't do that." And I would say, yes, you can do it. And I know this because I just did it in the sense that I just spent, 2 months in the desert, and I watched almost no Netflix. You know what I mean? Like maybe a couple hours. But what you have to do is you have to have a plan for what to do instead, right?
Yeah.
Now, Netflix is not a great example because it probably only costs like $14 a month, but it's a good thought experiment.
That's $180 a year.
That's right. Yeah. So, but it's a good thought experiment about what is it that you really need to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually even more of a kind of an important question, which is what should you be doing with your time if you are in kind of financial distress?
Yeah.
So should you be sitting and binge watching Tiger King or whatever the latest thing that you're going to be binge watching is, or should you be working on your career, right? Like, so you're in a situation which you might have thought was secure.
Yeah.
And now is not secure. And so is this a time that you should be planning a pivot? Is this a time you should be thinking about creating a small business? You know what I mean? And so you say, it's just $15 a month for Netflix. But if you cancel Netflix and now you don't have that temptation, and then you're just like, okay, here are some books to be reading, And so I'm going to give the reader 3 books that they should be reading instead of watching Netflix. Okay. So you can save your $15 a month. You can use that $15 a month to buy these books. So the first book is called The Magic of Thinking Big. And it's a book by this guy, David Schwartz. It's an old book. It reads like a Dale Carnegie book. And it's a little bit strange. But I'll tell you, this is a book that I read in my 30s that had a huge effect on my life. And it really is just like step number 1. If you want to live a better life, if you want to live a remarkable life, you have to start thinking bigger. Mm-hmm. And Schwartz tells stories of people who think bigger, and it sort of provides a little bit of a kind of kick in the ass that you need. You know what I mean? And so like someone who thinks big doesn't think, oh, I need Netflix to survive. A person who thinks big, right, goes, I don't need Netflix. You know what I mean? The second book is called The One Thing. And I don't remember the name of the author, but it's a very good book in terms of getting people to really, and it's as the title says, what is the one thing in your personal life? What is the one thing in your professional life? What are the one thing in these various elements of your life that is the most important thing?
Yeah. That's
necessary. So, for example, in a time of COVID, that one thing might be your health. Right.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh, I'm at risk, or it might be your employment or your professional situation, right? What is that one? Maybe it's your family, whatever that might be. And it's a really good book in terms of helping people get really, really clear about that. And then the last book is one that people might not have heard of, but had a big effect on me, called Making Ideas Happen. And it's like Scott Belsky or something like that is the author. And there are lots and lots of books about making ideas, right? There's lots of books about creativity and so on. But this is a book about taking an idea and turning it into an innovation. And in the book, he talks about the process and who you need and what you need as you move from idea phase to execution phase. And I think what we're talking about right now is a lot of ideas, but at some point you're going to need to execute those ideas. So, you were saying earlier, for example, talking to people about your finances. I'm a big believer in making announcements to people, right? So to say, I am going to do X, and to tell people that and people who care about you. Hell, even tell people who don't like you that you're going to do those things, right? Because what ends up happening is the people who like you go, how can I help?
Yeah.
Right. And both groups go, how's it going?
Yeah. Did you get it done?
And so I picked this up from this guy, Naval, who says that when he was working for a company at some point, he made the announcement that he was going to start his own business. After 6 months, he was still there, and people are like, so I thought you were going to start a business, huh? Yeah. What's going on there? And so that kind of level of accountability, I think, can be useful because, the people who are going to support you, they want to see you succeed. And the people who hate you want to see you fail. Both of those things are great motivators.
To get you there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by the way, reading is a cheat code for success in life. I think a lot of people fail to realize how important reading is because it's just much more active. Also, it tends to be when things get written down, they tend to be more important things. And so just cutting out these services that are just feeding you sugar all day, just easy consumption, and substituting it for frankly more difficult consumption, which is reading, has a lot of value, especially if you can start to turn your reading onto topics that are going to help you live a better, healthier, more remarkable life.
Yeah. And I think people shouldn't be afraid that they might be bored occasionally. They cut off all their sugar services and they might be bored, or that some of this stuff might be a little bit hard. It's okay. It's okay to have those emotions that I'm bored. I don't like this. This is difficult. It is okay to be there with those experiences. It is not easy. It is not always fun. It is okay to have those experiences while you go through this process. But also, like you talked about, I'm actually very optimistic of how we're going to come out of this whole COVID thing. We as Americans have been pushed out of our comfort zone. We have been forced to do things that we would never volunteer to do. And I think it's made people get really creative. And I think it's going to shift society in a lot of different levels, whether it's around social safety nets, it's around working from home, if it's around how we interact with each other, how we maybe are hopefully a world citizen rather than so insular. So for people that are creative and progressive and proactive, there's going to be huge opportunity. So I think as bad as all this is and tragic with the people that are losing their lives, it is forcing America and the rest of the world to see things differently. And I'm optimistic we're going to have some really good things come out of this.
I agree. Yeah, I'm an optimist by nature too. I've had such tight financial situations as a younger man. I know how stressful that is.
Yes. Yeah.
But I also know that I am not living that way anymore because I was good about dealing with it. You know what I mean? I got very focused on how can I have fun at a low cost, for example, and so, I remember like I became like the happy hour champ. You know what I mean? Like, why are we going out at 9:00? Let's go out at 5:00. And then I can be in bed at a reasonable hour also. Yeah. Like, why do we have to go out to dinner? Why can't we have a potluck? There's a lot of fun to be had that doesn't have to be costly, where you're spending a minimum amount of money for an experience, rather than a thing. Yeah. And one thing that's very clear about the research is that experiences matter. Yeah. And one of the things that's very clear is that people matter. And so, nowadays, like if you are bored, make a phone call. Phone calls are cheap, right? Like I remember like you wouldn't call people back in the day because the long distance rates were so expensive. Yeah. Now I call my buddy in Maine, and we could talk for an hour. Yeah. And I'm highly entertained, and it's an enjoyable experience, and I feel better. He feels better. And that cost me 1/10 of 1 cent. Yeah. And so that's a very good use of time. Yeah. And very good use of money. The return on 1/10 of 1 cent is a great, I'm making up that number, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the other things that come to mind as we talk about this sort of constellation of behaviors around people who are sort of financially distressed or concerned? They don't know what's going to happen. They're fine now, but the future might be bad.
Yeah, I'd say as much as you can, make your plan, see how many months you have money left. Try to pay your bills on time. Try to keep your credit good, because then you can maybe restructure your debt later. Keep decreasing your expenses in any way you can. It's good practice. I would say you really want to know what your income is, how much savings you have, how long your money is going to last. Okay. So if you're looking at it right now and you're planning out cutting your expenses, you're looking at your savings account, maybe you're working 50%, and you look at that situation and you realize you're going to run out of money in 4 months. Do something now, right? Do something now to downsize your housing. Have a conversation with family members. You don't want to have to borrow from family or move in with your parents or whatever, but you should lay some of that groundwork now and, offer to provide housing to friends and family also. Never borrow money from family or friends that you don't absolutely think you can pay back. If for some reason you don't think you're going to be able to pay them back, don't borrow money from them. It never works. It's never a good situation. Negotiate with your lenders early. Think about new habits, now we're all of a sudden caught here. I've got 5 credit cards. I've got all these loans. I can barely make it. Maybe learn positive things from that experience to change your behaviors in the future. There's other things too. You can take loans on your retirement accounts. You can refinance cars and take equity out. You can do 0% credit cards. There's a lot of tools you can use, but be very, very careful, because eventually you're going to have to pay.
Yes.
So never do any of those strategies unless you see how it gets you to the other side.
I want to add something to this, because I know you won't advertise, but I think if you're starting to get into that world, where you're starting to think about taking loans against your 401k, when you're starting to make big decisions that involve thousands of dollars, you should talk to a professional. I think that spending a little bit of money to talk to a fee-based financial planner like you, Amy, is, as I have always said, every dollar I've spent for you has returned $2 to $10 in terms of value. Yeah. And so I would say that those big decisions should be made with the advice, with the counsel of someone who is with lots of good information to understand what it means to you now and in the future, what it's really going to cost you, and is it really worth it? And maybe another person might say things you don't want to hear, like, maybe you need to get rid of the BMW, maybe you need to they might say things that will make you upset and angry, but at least you've heard it. Yes. And that's okay. It's okay with people tell you things you don't want to hear and you don't like. You get to decide, but sometimes it plants the seed to make it less scary and less negative when someone else has said it. Yes. So I want to talk about, because this is for singles, they may be dating coming out of this. And so that ends up becoming a real expense at times. Mm-hmm. And so what ends up happening oftentimes is, if you're on the apps, for example, you might have a lot of first dates. Right. And so these are a lot of dates that don't go anywhere. Yeah. And you're trying to balance having fun and making a good impression with not spending too much money, because why would you want to spend a lot of money on a first date if you don't have to, especially knowing that there's a good probability you'll never see that person again. Mm-hmm. And so I'll give you an example. And so look, I get it. Like there are different opinions. Like there are some people who don't like coffee dates for a first date. Like I've seen women on the apps who are like, take me to dinner or don't bother, kind of a thing. And you're just like, all right, well, I'm not sure, that's a good strategy. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's good to agree to do that necessarily. But I'll give you a quick example of this. So I have a buddy of mine. So this is back when I was in Boulder. Within a week, we both met the same woman. And we both took her out. Yeah. Okay. Now, I took her out to lunch, and we had a fine, nice patio lunch kind of a thing. And as if I'm already not disadvantaged enough. Like my buddy is, he's tall and he's handsome and he's charming and he's, you know what I mean? The ladies love him, so I'm already fighting an uphill battle. The only thing I have is I'm taller than him, right? So that's the only thing I've got going in my favor. So I take her to lunch. We have a nice time. He buys a picnic lunch and takes her, and they have a picnic by the creek, and he reads her poetry.
Did it work?
Of course it worked.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Of course it worked. So not only did he spend less money, but he also, because, he didn't want to just do the obvious thing, he had a first date that stood out. You know what I mean? Like they walked, they sat in the sun, they had a nice healthy meal, and he
made an effort.
He made a little bit of an extra effort. And so what I would say is for those of you out there who are dating, if either like keep an open mind, if you're not the one paying, that this person might be actually showing fiscal responsibility by their choice of the first date. And if you are paying, to think, is there a creative way to get the same experience, which is really just to get to know someone, without breaking the bank, so to speak.
And
so,
having that conversation, I'm not dating, so luckily I don't have to deal with that. But having the conversation, if it's available when you first meet someone, I'm thinking of doing this. Does that sound good? How about this? Is there a way? Is it usually the guys are having to pay still?
Yes.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's still it still exists. I mean, it's not 100%, but it's quite common.
Interesting. Okay.
I think that you're right. Like in terms of a little bit of creativity and a little bit getting off script goes a long way in terms of making a good first impression that's there. I realize it's more work, but that's what ends up happening oftentimes is there's a trade-off. It's money and time. Mm-hmm. And so when you're in financial distress, you just have to spend more time in order to save money. So the last thing that I want to do, Amy, is I want to talk about longer term considerations, because I think that, everybody talks about this as a wake up call. This is a call to action. I've used that term call to action because I agree with you. We're going to get through this virus. You know what I mean? There's eventually, going to be strategies, tactics that are going to make this less risky. Things will go back to some semblance of normal and so on. But there's always going to be the equivalent of a pandemic looming, right? I like to say every 10 years, the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, we're going to have a recession. We're going to have an oil crisis. We're going to have a pandemic. We're going to have other stuff.
That's right. And so let's talk a little bit, obviously I think the thing is like the alarm bell should be ringing. As soon as you hear this, you should be sitting down and tidying up, as I like to say, tidying up your financial situation, tidying up your house, tidying up your life in order to be able to make ends meet in the short run. But as we emerge from this, what are those sort of longer term considerations that are coming to mind for you?
Well, certainly getting your debt in order, making sure you don't have credit card debt, that you don't have extensive car debt, that sort of, you don't have mortgage debt that exceeds beyond when you turn 62 to 65. And saving, saving in a way for your retirement or when you're not working for your financial independence. So even during COVID, unless you're in an extreme situation, like you're not going to be able to make your rent, you might want to stay with if you have a company that's doing a match, you might want to stay with that. I've had, my son is backed off his savings, but he still is putting in enough for his match. I said, you can't be a member of our family if you don't do that. So, so it's the basics. It's saving 10 to 20% for retirement, whether that's in buying rental properties or your 401k or investment portfolio outside of your retirement, keeping your debt in control so that if you have 50% of your income, you can still make your debt payments. Still check in with yourself on the good places you want to spend your money. They should all reflect your values and your priorities, where you spend your money. And the reality is, if you make good decisions about your money, you actually can have more luxuries than if you don't make good decisions, because you're going to pay less interest, less debt payments. You'll be able to find the perfect apartment or the car at the right price, at the right interest rate. You'll have cash to put down on your car purchase, all those kind of things. So unless you're really, really strapped during the pandemic, and some people are,
Sure.
Continue to save long term, continue to pay down your debt, continue to watch your credit cards and bring your credit cards to zero every month. Make decisions that support your values and your priorities.
I think that's great. Now, this is not called Surviving Solo. This is called The Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life. So I want to add one idea here, and that is that the long-term goal is to thrive, not survive.
Yeah.
And so what that might mean is that there's some pivoting that needs to go on. Besides sort of like lifelong financial skills of investing early and often and not overspending your means, the other one is, what is it that you're doing, right? Like, so can you make your work feel less like work? Is it possible that you can use your time for skill development? So again, are you going to wallow in it and just watch TV and, you know, and have an extra glass of wine?
Yeah, part of the time.
but like, you know, what are some essential skills, right? Like you've gotten a taste of not commuting. Would you like to continue to not commute? You've gotten a taste of how you might not be able to trust your employer to take care of you, you know, because they're going to take care of themselves first. You know, I have a friend who's a server at a restaurant.
Yep.
And, you know, of course the restaurant, you know, laid you off really very quickly. And then, as this person was faced with going back to work, the restaurant owner said, "Hey, I want you to continue to get unemployment, and I'm going to pay you some money under the table." Oh. You know, kind of thing. And the person was not comfortable with that. Yeah. And so, you know, you start to go, well, maybe I don't want to work in a profession, you know what I mean? In which I'm so expendable. Yeah. And so, you know, I gave some recommendations of some books, but I just want to say, like, now more than ever, there are just so many options in terms of learning new skills. You know, it used to have to be the case that if you wanted to learn new skills, you had to sign up for night classes or you had to go back to university or whatever. But like now, between Khan Academy, Coursera, edX, Udacity, YouTube, you know what I mean? The Amazon, like there are just so many places for the internet, you know what I mean? For information about how to think in new ways, how to acquire new skills, how to, in our solo entrepreneur episode, how to take a hobby, you know, start something out as a hobby and get the tax write-off and test it. You know what I mean? Like, see, is there product market fit there and so on. And so I think that one of the things is like, boy, this sucks. But if it kicks you in the butt and it gets you to start thinking bigger about what you want your next 10 years to look like, then I think that you're really taking the most opportunity here. But again, first step is don't be homeless. Don't have to move into your parents' basement, right? Like, don't get your car repossessed. Don't ruin your credit score.
And if you think about that, if you have your financial house in order, then you have more choices, more freedoms, more options. You know, to do these other things. And you have less fear around being unemployed or changing employment. Yeah.
And I'll leave with one thought experiment for a moment. And this is one of the beautiful things about being solo is without dependence. I mean, you may be supporting people in your life, you know what I mean? But largely without dependence, you have optionality.
Yep.
That is, you can move to a different place. You can downsize. You can Look, if Elon Musk is thinking about getting rid of all of his possessions, then you can. Right? So
is he keeping his car?
Yes, he'll keep his car, of course, because he can write that down as a company vehicle.
Yeah.
But the Europeans, I think, are often much better at this than Americans, because the Americans are sold this sort of bill of goods with the American dream. It's the big house with a white picket fence. Well, the big house and the white picket fence, as we talked about in our previous episode, is can be a ball and chain.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the very popular things in Europe are what's called digital nomads, right? So these are people who store their possessions. They have one bag, their computer, and their phone. So they tend to work jobs that allow them to work remotely. And so their summers are in Berlin and their winters are in Bali.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And they are working this sort of gig economy, and they have a very low burn rates, as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And they are really agile, and they live adventurous lives. I'm kind of tired of here. I'm going to go over there. They work gigs that they want to work. They turn down gigs they don't want to turn down. Now, I know this. I can imagine people hearing that going, oh my God, I can't do that for whatever reason. Sure, that's fine. But the point is that people do it.
Yeah.
Right? It is possible to do it. And just because you're solo doesn't mean, because you're solo means you don't have to play by the rules that have been designed for most people who get married and have kids.
Yes. So why not do it?
Why not start to think about how you might make some bigger, more adventurous changes when it comes to either new career opportunities, new adventures, lowering your burn rate, and so on.
Yeah.
So,
sounds great.
Very fun. Well, Amy, as always, it's always fun to talk to you.
Yeah.
It's nice that we have an audience now who's listening along. And for solo listeners, please send me your questions. We are going to be doing some live Zoom events. So go to petermcgraw.org to the Solo Podcast page to sign up, where we can start to have some conversations around these kinds of topics. This one, I think, is an incredibly important one.
Yeah. And hang in there. This will pass. You'll be okay. If you do the work, keeping track of what you spend, know what you have, make a plan, call your lenders, it'll be easier and better, but you're going to be okay. You're going to make it through the other side.
And I'm going to end with this, because this is something you always do with me, Amy.
Yes.
Is make a to-do list.
Yep.
Right? And so you got to get that to-do list. You got to write it down on paper, and it just feels so good to cross out.
Yep. Yeah. And this won't take forever, and it's not as painful as it seems. So give it a shot.
Very good. Money Amy, thank you so much.
Yeah. You take care.
Okay. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.com. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.